Good evening. So we're going to kick off this meeting. So first things first, we're going to do our roll call. So Nicole, do you want to do the roll call?
Simone Tarver.
Here.
Mary Fossey.
Here.
Chris Garai.
Present.
John Monroe.
Present.
Julius Wilson.
Here.
Benjamin Young.
Present.
Kari Kwas.
Here.
Ethel McNeil.
Here.
James Langus.
Awesome. So next thing, we're going to approve our minutes as they are in our packet. So I move to approve them as they are.
Okay, I failed to print the minutes. So can we approve them at our next
Yeah.
meeting? We can do 2 approvals. I did not put them in your packet. Sorry about that.
Okay. And then our next thing is going to be comments from the chair. I don't really have too much to say. I'm really excited that we have, that we've been able to find 3 different people interested in being our districting master. That's super exciting. And I'm appreciative that everyone's here. Do you have anything, Chris? Okay. And then staff comments.
If you look at your packet that I did print for you, my intern is gone today, so she's gone one day and I completely messed everything up, I know. We have the agenda. On the back side of that, it says districting master's roles and responsibility, which I sent to you. This is something that our attorney, Mr. Safarli, provided for us to try to help us through this process. So I just wanted to point that out and make sure everyone knew where that had come from. And then the 11 questions on the back that we're going to be asking are there. And so Simone will read the questions to Dr. Ipma, who goes by TJ. He said that's fine to call him that. So she'll read the questions. He'll answer them. We can ask clarifying questions. And then when he's finished, we will review the questions that Tony Fairfax provided. And then we have planning and legal both here tonight to answer questions we might have about the process, to get a better understanding, kind of help us get more information if we need from city staff. So we've got 2 guests today. David Stahlheim and Flora. So we're good to go. And you guys have already met Flora. So if there's no questions or anything, I think we just get started. We have 2 really big meetings, this one and the 18th, so I think every second counts. So I'm going to move over there. TJ will come up here, and then if there's anything needed from me, I'll be on that mic.
Thank you, Nicole.
Yes. Would you like a copy of the questions?
I have. Thank you.
Perfect.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Get my knees around the table here. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll kick off the first question. So please introduce yourself and provide a brief overview of your background and familiarity with Everett.
Please make sure you can hear me clear. Thanks. My name is Challing Ipma. Challing is the pronunciation. I'm Dutch by nationality, and it's a very Dutch name. I'm chair of the Department of Mathematics at Western Washington University. And I think you've all seen the materials I provided, so I don't need to drag you through any more of that. So what's relevant to the challenge you face and what I might bring to you here is that I have served as the district master for Whatcom County twice, once after the 2010 census, and then a few years ago when the county council changed from 3 districts to 5 districts, which was an extremely politically hot situation to be in. I developed a process there. It was very ill-defined in terms of the rules I had to follow. I developed a process which I thought was very efficient and effective. It was straightforward. And if I was to help you out with your challenge, that's probably what I would try to do here and implement a similar system, which I will say differs a little bit from the way I read these questions. These questions seem to assume a certain way of proceeding, and I would not proceed that way. In particular, I'd be looking for a much more interactive process in terms of which I would provide drafts that would be discussed here, open to public input at any point, and go away and draw up another draft, as opposed to what I read here seems to assume that go away and suddenly throw out a map and have people argue over that. That's not the way I would intend to proceed. In terms of familiarity with Everett, other than with the traffic jams on I-5, I've Google mapped, I've looked at the district school maps, I've looked at some of the things that are on the districting sites, like what is Everett Districts Now and so on. I have, well, I think a reasonable overview at least of the geography, and maybe of some of the concerns, but I have a lot of questions I want to ask you. And if we do things the way in which I would prefer to do them, you'd be helping me out a lot with figuring out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense.
Awesome. Okay, so question 2, which you kind of touched on a little bit already. Have you ever worked for a districting commission or like body? Please explain. And I'm not going to say that if not, because you have.
Yeah, right. So as I said, I worked with the Whatcom County Council twice. What was very interesting there was that I reported to a committee of 4 people, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. Yes, that was fun. It was very clear, you know, what the issues were, what the factions were, and so on. And one of my questions for you would be, what are the issues and what are the factions here, if there are factions? But that's my experience. I managed to navigate that successfully. In each case, my proposals, the final proposals, were unanimously adopted, and I was pretty happy about that, especially with the most recent, very touchy occasion.
So question 3, please explain how you view the role of district master.
It's a strange position in some ways. You know, you work at the for the commission, the committee. On the other hand, in my experiences, you need to do some leading of the committee as well. There's some management involved. The way I work, though, is you know, I take the input that I get from the committee, from the public. All being well, it'll be a very open public process. Try to incorporate that into a new version of the map which responds to some of the issues and concerns I've heard, and turn that in for further discussion. So drawing up the maps is, of course, a big part of the role, but keeping the process moving along in a reasonable way is also a part of what I see as the job.
Thank you. And number 4, how would you keep open communication and the districting commission informed?
Well, you have a website, districting commission website. I would think at any time that I produce a draft map, which I would assume would be every 2 weeks or 4 weeks, or however frequently you guys meet, it would be posted there, and it would be open for discussion. You have a really nice room here. I was worried that you might not, but it's open to the public. We have projection facilities here. We can, at a meeting like this, flash up the plan that I've drawn up, argue about things that you like or don't like. And I foresee an extremely open process and a constant interaction between the committee and myself.
Okay, and then number 5, what is the biggest problem that you would expect to face when creating a district map?
I think right now it would be the fact that I don't have an intimate knowledge of how Everett works. You know, in Whatcom County, I've ridden my bicycle on pretty much every road there. I know how it works. I've lived there 30 years. I know how the county population votes. In that case, it was Democrats against Republicans. I don't have that kind of first-hand knowledge of the lay of the land in Everett. And so, again, that's a situation where I'd be extremely dependent on the input from the public and from the committee members to help me figure out what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. The way I work professionally as a mathematician, I was chair of my department. To get anything done, I have to put out a proposal there, and then they rip it apart, and they tell me what it should be like, and that's the way, you know, eventually it turns out okay. So that's the way I would see things happening over here. I would put out something that's probably be full of stuff that you don't like, and we'll massage it into something that people are happy with.
And then number 6, what familiar do you have working with shape files?
Well, that's an easy one. None, and I don't intend to acquire any knowledge of that at all, because the way I work is would be with the GIS department of the city. They would be doing the work with the census data, the maps, the precinct maps, the neighborhood maps that they have. And I would strongly recommend that you know, whoever you have do the job, work that way, because that way you know that the numbers they're working with and the maps that they're working with, and you know that everything's above board. Also, my communication would be all on the public record, and working with people with the GIS department, and I prefer it that way.
And number 7, how do you plan to understand and ensure communities of mutual interest are not separated? What does the term communities of mutual interest mean to you?
Well, as I've said, I don't have the first-hand knowledge of precisely how the lay of the land in Everett. So I would be, to a significant extent, dependent on the input from the people here, saying, you know, well, where you've drawn that boundary there, it cuts right through a neighborhood that shouldn't be split in a particular way. I did see somewhere in the online materials that concerning the whole process of whether there should be districts, that people seem to feel that neighborhoods were the entity that they wanted to see preserved, that districting should be centered around neighborhoods. That makes sense. One imagines neighborhoods do reflect certain communities of interest. What's community of interest? Well, people are bound by often geographic factors, economic factors, ethnic factors. All of those issues are there. Typically, but not always, neighborhoods kind of designate areas of mutual interest also. But again, there I would be very much subject to input from the locals who know what the issues are in particular areas. Just for example, one that I happened to notice looking at the ethnic distribution was that Casino Corner, I think it's called, seems to have a very strong Hispanic presence there, which caused me some, I would say, concern. But you know, when I was thinking about where would I draw some borderlines, that seemed to be like a place where I would draw one. And then I saw that you know, there was the strong Hispanic presence there, and it seems like, well, maybe that's something that you would certainly have to take into account when you decide where the boundary between the districts lies over there. And I assume there's other factors that are important to the community here. And of course, one of the questions I have for you is, what are they?
And number 8, there are 2 key tactics used in gerrymandering, cracking and packing. How would you prevent this from happening?
Well, packing is an interesting one. Both of these things are very hard to define, as is gerrymandering in general. You know it when you see it, kind of thing. Take the example of what I did with Whatcom County. Republicans against Democrats. The city is Democrat. The farmlands are Republican. What do you want to do? You know, so is it packing when you have, you know, 2 districts which are purely part of Bellingham County? No, because it's where people live. So you know, sometimes to avoid something that might seem like packing, you would have to do some gerrymandering. You know, you have to sort of forcibly try and get something that has 50% Republicans, 50% Democrats, and that kind of thing. I didn't do any of that. I did what made sense in terms of the geographic distribution of people, communities of interest, which were fairly clearly defined in that context. And so I think when you do things, especially do things in an open setting like I propose to do with you, I don't think that these are going to be issues that are problematic issues.
Thank you. And number 9, how would you suggest presenting the districting map to the people of our city?
Well, as I've said before, you know, you got a site every time I put out a map. It should be posted right there, open to input. And I assume the public is invited to these meetings. They should be here. I don't know to what extent they're given an opportunity to provide some input, but I would be totally open to doing that. So I see that as an iterative process in which successive maps are put out and refined. In fact, what I did in the Whatcom County context, I had, shall we say, two parallel streams. I had Plan A, which kept getting refined, and a Plan B, which kept getting refined in a different way until eventually we had to make a decision as to which of the two alternative significant routes we were going to adopt in the end. But all that was out front, printed copies available to anybody coming into the meeting, and with all being well, it'll all be on the website in as much detail as anybody wants to see.
Okay. And 10, what assistance do you expect or need from city staff to support your work? So you mentioned the GIS. Do you want to talk about that a little bit
there's
more?
that. And the other thing I found very useful is to have a clear channel of communication between the committee and myself. I don't want to be dealing with individual committee members, and I don't want, anybody to think that anybody else has influence on me, outside of the public record. So in the case of Whatcom County, I worked with the county clerk. Here, I imagine I would work with Nicole, perhaps, or maybe with the chair of the committee, but there should be one designated person that is the channel for all communication between myself and the committee, and is also responsible for posting things on the website.
And number 11, are you willing to attend community meetings once we have draft maps ready for the community to provide input on?
Certainly, yes. I kind of think that we might want to rethink some of the procedures that I've seen outlined, which seem to suggest that there would be a map and then there would be, I think, a community meeting in each of the 5 districts that are drawn up on that map. I kind of wonder whether you couldn't preempt some of that by perhaps having some of the initial meetings with the drafts in some of those locations. Well, of course, the facilities we have here are very, very good from the point of view of being able to explore the options. But yes, it makes total sense that once we've settled on something, I guess it would be maybe the beta draft or something like that, because it would be subject to further refinement. But at some point, you have to go out to the districts, apparently legally, and it makes sense that I go there and hear what the locals have to say. Sure.
Awesome. Okay, well, that's our 11 questions.
Does anyone have any clarifying questions that they would like to ask? This microphone's way.
I have some questions, but I don't want to take your time. I don't know what your agenda is.
My clarifying question would be related to how you would get the information from us, since you don't know Everett as well. How does that process work for you?
So I have some questions to ask today, which would help me a little bit there. In particular, I would love to see a map up somewhere and take you through some of the things, tell you what I think, and have you correct me where I'm wrong, and maybe point out some things I should know about. But I see it as a very interactive process. Probably at these meetings, it might be that there needs to be a designated committee member, especially initially when I'm still somewhat at sea, to help me point out, well, maybe you should rethink this, before we put out something that the rest of the committee spends time on.
Going back to the shape files and the type of information that you preferred, could you talk a little bit more about that? I hate to plead ignorance about shape files, but that's a new term to me. And could you talk a little bit more about why you don't prefer that?
Oh, sorry. It's not that I don't prefer that. It's just that I don't use them at all. I have the GIS person use those things. So what I was thinking about there was, rather than have somebody work out of their home or office with whatever data they might have, which may or may not be census data, I would much rather work, and I think you should probably much rather work with somebody in the Everett office or the Snohomish office who you know is using the right data, the 2010 census data, and has the right legal descriptions, because when it comes out, when you have to define the districts themselves, you need the legal description as well. And again, that's not my expertise at all. I can work with the numbers.
I think we have a little bit of time. We can take a few questions. I think probably David and Flora could be ready. They might need to actually answer some of these questions. So I think we'll have them answer, and then I will just summarize and repeat into the microphone because we don't have enough space for microphones for everyone at home to hear. Is that okay? Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so my question, so what are the issues? You know, it's not Republicans against Democrats, I assume. What are the issues? I'm putting you on the spot.
I live in the north end of town, and we often, and I say we, get presented that we're the only ones leading leading Everett at all. And I think that is a function of many things, from where the city began, where it's been annexed in over the years, and that kind of thing. So I think that the districts ideally would be spreading that around. So trying to balance the power that is seen to be in the north end of the city.
Can I clarify the north end of the city? There is a disparity also between the east and the west as far as you're looking at things of, I guess, economics and
Socioeconomic.
yes. So while they do sometimes get grouped together, it's not necessarily the same thing. You also need to look kind of at the east and the west side of things.
That's pretty clear when I look at the Google Maps and pretty much everything I see. I was wondering more about questions like ethnicity. I don't know if politics plays a part at all. Socioeconomic factors, clearly.
I was just going to say, I think that's a great question, and I think it's something that probably all of us have thought about, and frankly, we haven't gotten to the point where we've discussed what we truly think are some of the main things beyond the obvious, getting population numbers correct and some of those things. I think we have some vague concepts, but I think that's probably something for more discussion beyond what's been said already.
I agree with what he has said here. I think another problem too, when you talk about gerrymandering, I think a big problem is that as we get districts going, people who want their own agendas to be put forward will begin to move people into different neighborhoods so that they can have the monopoly and control, which is gerrymandering. And that's my fear here, is that a lot of people are inside information or inside conversations coming in, and people are beginning to voice more of the opinion of certain people who want to control certain things. And I think that is going to be a big problem once districting is established in this area.
When I look at the numbers, though, I think the city is around 100,000 population, so each district is about 20,000. It's going to take quite a lot, I think, to sway things one way or the other, but I don't know. That's, yeah. When I looked at the Everett Districts Now website, I got the impression that they had already have somebody draw up a map. They mentioned a UW geographer. Is that the case? Are you happy with the map? Are there things about that map that you're unhappy about? What's the story?
So we're not, that was not a city process. That was a community, a really powerful community-driven process. And so we now are doing our own city process. And We did ask the gentleman who drew the maps for Everett Districts Now to apply for this position, but unfortunately he was suffering some health issues and didn't feel it would be the right time for him to do that. So, and there's the only thing that was voted on by the community is the 5-2, not necessarily the lines that defined that 5-2.
Understood. I just thought it would be very useful to me to, if we had a look at that map and you could tell me what you liked and what you disliked about it, that would give me some useful leads. But if that's not the case, that's okay.
I think that that's not out of the realm of possibilities once we select a districting master to look at what it is we do or do not like about things that have already been created. It's to be a public conversation just like this one, so I don't think there's any flaw in that. We just haven't gotten to that yet because we're just trying to meet that 90-day deadline to select a districting master.
Yeah. I couldn't find it online, but it's there. Yeah. So one more thing that mystifies me. We're talking about the Everett city limits and not the neighborhoods. There's a big discrepancy on the website. Silver Lake, for example. We are talking here purely about the city limits, and like the rest of Silver Lake, neighborhood is not part of what we're discussing with the districts here. Is that correct? Yeah. And other bits on the neighborhood map that are gray, that are not neighborhoods, nevertheless, count, right? Okay, so I just want clarity on that.
We probably have time for one more. David and Flora, do you have anything that you would like to add at this point, or you feel comfortable so far?
I have a couple of questions, please. We have a memorandum from our city attorney who it was prepared by Hugh Spitzer, who is a pretty distinguished attorney that the city attorney's office and the city of Everett have used often in the past. He's now a professor at the University of Washington Law School, I understand. And
I've read that letter.
You read the letter, and a couple of points in the letter is that under the statute, which you must be familiar with, it says that a city's plan must observe some basic rules, and it's really fairly clear in terms of what those rules are. And you have a copy, so I was going to ask Nicole to make sure you had one. You have that.
The 3 Cs, compact, contiguous, community of interest.
Yeah, because that may kind of put up the goalposts in terms of really what those criteria are that we should really be focusing on. Secondly, you mentioned an interactive process and posting things on the website. And in reading your approach, which thank you for preparing this, you talked about a succession of meetings open to the public at which you would present alternatives. And at those meetings we would, I suspect you would present a different draft or a couple of drafts, and you would provide your rationale for both drafts, and we would ask questions, and at that time we would be able to get into all of the different, our different perspective on your work. I would prefer that approach, and then having us put them on the website following hearing your explanation of what you've prepared, so that when they are on the website, the general public has the familiar knowledge of what we were, familiarity with what we were looking at, the rationale that you presented when you were explaining your different drafts to us. So I would prefer that approach rather than an interactive one where we just kind of continue to build it a little bit over time And as an expert, having you prepare 3 drafts or 4 drafts or however many there are, and having us then be able to look at them and decide next steps. So. And then
I would say that the more open the process, the better.
Yeah.
In particular, you refer to the letter from Hugh Spitzer, I think his name is, the lawyer. And there was this rather nebulous issue about, what was it, the SB, the law that was passed fairly recently, which is actually very hard to interpret, about favouring particular communities and disfavouring others. I think the best way to avoid any difficulties in that regard is just to be totally open and get input from as many people as possible. So I would certainly, when it comes to choices, I would recommend openness.
Well, we're talking openness.
Right.
We're going to have, it's a very transparent process. We're going to have we're required to have 6 public meetings to share, is it 5? Okay, good. That's even a little
It's
more
6. It is
efficient.
6. It's 5, 1 in each district, and then 1 at large.
Yeah, so at that point in time, we will be, I believe, talking about perhaps I'm not sure, I have to ask, whether it's the preferred alternative or other plans as well. I can't recall. But I'd like you to consider, because as I read your approach, you talk about that as kind of a plan also that you've utilized. And I think that would work well for us, particularly because the public's going to benefit from hearing why you have prepared a plan and what your rationale is. They'll understand it rather than just put it on the website the week before. And the other comment I would make, in terms of getting support, rather than having a particular committee member work with you, I would personally, rather than keep any of our biases out of it when we're talking about Everett and trying to describe for you different aspects, boundaries, whatever they may be, that you work with, if it's the Everett Planning Department, and who apparently is going to be doing some of the mapping and helping prepare some of the data. They are the most logical party to be able to answer any of your questions. They're very familiar with our city and boundaries and demographics and all of the different parts. So,
Flora would like to clarify something quickly.
Just quickly, regarding the 6 mandatory under state law public meetings, that's for at the very far end of this process when we say, this is it, we've got it, here's our final draft. And that you have said, yep, this is our final draft, this is what we want to present to people as the districting plan. And then when you have that final plan, you will present it in public forums in each of the 5 proposed districts, and then 1 citywide public forum as well. So before that, while you're still drawing the lines, while you're still deciding that you're not at your final draft yet, you can have as many meetings as you want before that, but that is a mandatory 6, but that's when you're totally done and all the lines are drawn and you say, yep, we've got it. Yes, and you can still make new edits if after receiving public feedback you think, oh, we'd better change this line here, or if you want to make changes then. But those mandatory 6 meetings at the very end, that's when you're done. Any meetings you have before that are just up to you how many you want to have.
And that's the time that we kind of have for TJ. So if there's 1 or 2 more questions, that's great, but we need to move on or we're never going to meet our 90-day deadline.
Thank you. Pleasure.
So our next candidate this evening is Tony Fairfax from Census Channel LLC, who wasn't able to come in person but did submit those questions in writing. They're in your packet, and then I emailed them to you this afternoon when I saw them. And so I think we should ask any clarifying questions we need to legal or planning around Tony's questions. And then we can kind of discuss both Tony and Mr. IPMA. But we're not making a decision today, so that will come on the 18th. But just kind of to talk through things we might not have understood or things we might want to consider, kind of debrief type of thing. I'll just, everyone just kind of relook over those questions real quick and then, or the answers, I guess, and then we'll move forward in just a minute. We earlier kind of talked about, do we want to read these in? Or I'll put all of this on the website as well tomorrow. And I think I printed enough copies for the community members we have here to share and read through these. Do we want to read them out loud? Or do we just want to jump into discussion? What's your preferred method? I'll look to Simone and Chris to kind of lead us on that.
I'd be okay with just going straight to discussion if everyone doesn't want to read them out loud right now, if everyone's read them already. Okay, let's jump into discussion. So I'd say the first thing that popped out at me when I reviewed Tony Fairfax's questions in comparison to TJ was that Tony does the GIS stuff. He seems to be kind of an expert at that, which would be helpful, but I did really appreciate that TJ was willing and wanting to work with the city and ensuring that we used, the best data that's available. So that was my first kind of impression.
It might help me just a little bit, and maybe somebody else, if we could have somebody explain to us what these shape files are.
In single syllables? Shapefile is 2 syllables. GIS, 3. So shapefile, so geographic information systems, what I call our smart maps. So you see all of our maps. Well, you know about voting precincts, for example. So a voting precinct is a shape. And within that shape, there's data associated with that shape. So that data for voting precincts is registered voters, those who voted, those who didn't vote, other data in there. So shapefiles in this case will be tied to a bigger geography of one of your council districts, and then shapes within that will be your census blocks that will have population, how many people, how many households, race and ethnicity, that type of data. So it's just basically a smart thing. So when your district master draws a boundary of five areas, it'll extract from the census data, the data in terms of how many people and the races and ethnicity and other census data that you want to help inform your decision. So you don't actually see any of that. It's work that's done behind the scenes. Your output is a map with any other geographic information and the data associated with that. So that's what you see.
Are there multiple census blocks in the city then?
Yeah, there's I don't know how many, but there are probably 500 at least within the city. So the census geography is from a nation down to a state, down to counties, down to cities, and then within cities there's tracts, there's block groups and blocks. And so there's a whole bunch of different layers of those things, and the smallest is a block, which is literally usually a block kind of thing, and that's the data, that's the detailed data that every 10 years the census counts to. And that's what you're going back to when you're doing this, is you're going back to the 2010 census.
So my last question is could a district subdivide a block?
Well, it could, but I mean, literally, it's a block, and so if you drew your district through a block, then there would have to be some kind of estimates as to how much population is on either side. But I mean, literally, it's one block like here. I mean, in a city, blocks are much more known geography. I mean, here there's a few blocks that are like in Smith Island that are large, you know, but nobody lives in them, kind of thing. But yeah.
Could you kind of just speak to the difference between having a consultant that you support with the GIS work or versus what you would do, and how that would look differently in the non-biased way, but just to help educate the group on what that might look like for a process and an outcome?
Sure. So the city of Everett, we have staff in several departments, but two primarily that have really good GIS technicians, people that do this work. And so planning has them, and Public Works does it. Public Works has kind of a lot of things that they do with utilities and roads and right-of-ways and stuff like that there. So what the difference that we would do, for example, a couple years ago when the districts now had their proposal, I mean, we pulled up all that data and we looked at the census information. So we double-checked their data, and we found errors, actually, some significant errors in some of their data, and they missed blocks and stuff like that. So no matter what, I think it's the city's responsibility, because we're going to put something forward. So irrespective of who does the work, at some point the city, I feel, my recommendation to legal and the council that is that we'll at least check the work, whatever's done, to make sure that it's accurate, that nothing's missed. So the difference between someone that has the GIS background is a workload issue, honestly. So someone that has the ability to do a lot of that work will take some workload off of us, because the difference between us checking the work and us doing the work is a time thing. But I can also tell you, just with Mr. Ipsing, that I am familiar and I know who he worked with in Whatcom County, and so I actually did some checks on that the other day, and I live up there also, by the way. So so I checked with the GIS person, and their interaction was fine, and so very positive things, and it wasn't a huge workload. There is a workload that we would encounter. I told Nicole I think that we can support that based on my investigation up there, so kind of thing. So hopefully that helps answer that part.
So is it safe to summarize as the distinction there is who does the work, whether someone works with these shapefiles or works with the data? Is that?
Well, there's probably, I guess, two things. One, who does the work in terms of who's drawing the geography, and so the district master does that part, working with the district and commission and the public, so drawing the geography. And then so TJ, I'm going to use that because I'm just messing up his name, so he would present that map, and then we would do that data work, and so we would go and run the numbers. He would find perhaps that they're off a little bit, and so he would interact with us to adjust those boundaries before he presented that map. And so we'd be doing some things behind the scenes before you saw that, based on his direction.
So there are a couple of things there. One is that these shapefiles are pretty much just overlays of the map, and because the map is never going to change. The physical map, you have certain physical boundaries, and they're never going to change, and the shapefiles sit over the top of that, and that's how they can change. He can move these lines, and then the shapefiles will change somewhat because of the lines moving to incorporate that data. But I also wanted to say that when you're talking about that, I think it's somewhat challenging for me anyway when when the city is taking the sole responsibility of creating those maps themselves, because now it's not to say that someone from the city is going to be biased. It is to say that we want to take out the appearance of any bias from anyone, and having a party that has no, as we would say, skin in the game, doing these maps, it would be, to me, it seems it would be better. That's just an opinion, and I am leaving it as an opinion.
Sorry to interrupt you, Ben. Does anyone else have any more questions for David before we move into the discussion of the candidates? Just because if he's sitting here and we've got questions on for planning, this is the opportunity, and he'll be here. But if we're going to move on to discussion, then he doesn't have to stay right here. But you still have to stay in the room.
I just think it was specifically posed as a question for these, so I think it's important that we understand it. That's why I'm kind of grilling it a little bit. So I guess, can someone give a ruling whether that's concerning in this case or not? It sounds like no, but maybe there's a difference of opinion.
You're talking about the shapefiles itself?
The use of them and his answer to the question, basically.
No, I don't, that's a technical thing to me. It's behind the scenes. I'm not worried about it. It's the process. I think that he illustrated. I think that discussion is more tied to the process, but the actual shapefiles and the technical side of it is a technical thing. I think the discussion is around who you're comfortable with the district and commission master. So.
Okay, now we can move on to now we'll officially start doing the discussion. Does anyone have anything they want to start off with discussing these two?
I think before we compare, which actually might even be a conversation for the 18th, we just need to get through talking through Tony's submittal, and then we can either compare or talk about the differences. But I think first we need to talk about him. This is kind of fake interview time right now.
So just to be clear, we'll not have an opportunity to meet or talk with him?
No, I did have the opportunity to talk with him. I'll say it was very pleasant. He's very timely in returning materials, but he's in Virginia. And he did say that if appointed, he would, fly out and begin working with you. It didn't sound like the commute was going to be an issue for him. And so that is what I know. And if you have more questions about him, I can answer, I will. And if I can't answer them, I will ask him, and then I will bring those back on the 18th.
I would think, to go to Chris's point, what would be the 18th, what would be the possibility of doing something like a Zoom session with him to at least physically see and understand? Because for me, body language means a great deal.
I don't know the answer to that. I will give it a go. I will talk to IT and Mr. Fairfax and Deb Williams, who knows a lot more about what this room's capabilities are than I do, and I will email you an answer.
I'm going to talk out loud. I guess my clarifying question is if he is in Virginia, and I'm trying to quickly reread again where it's talking about he'll get back to us within a day via telephone or email. can come to public meetings, but the map should be presented at a public meeting as well as prior versions. And not jumping to compare, but I'm trying to, how timely is that? Or how can that be more of a discussion with the person if they're so far away, unless we're able to have the Zoom call that was just mentioned, to be able to have more of a dialogue with the person that we're working with?
So I think if this is who you guys choose, he will come out as needed. And so our meetings are very planned. I don't think that that would be an issue. We'll just have to probably be more strategic in our planning and stay, you know, we're not going to cancel meetings. We're not going to miss things. We're going to be on time because we need to respect someone else's flight and things like that. You also have, you know, the budget that you guys have is somewhere like I think $82,000 is what you have to spend. And if you we choose to spend that on travel or bringing him out, I mean, that will eat up more maybe than somebody else. But that's what the money is for, so that you can make the best decision for the commission. So I don't think that that should necessarily detour you, because you do have the funds to pay for it.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to hear from Bob Schweitzer on the 18th. I understand Ben's point on the appearance of fairness and working with our city staff. It was good to hear Dave tell us that, share with us that I believe he said that the practice would be if we were working with TJ, that TJ would send the information to our folks first, and they would scrub it and make sure that it was everything was accurate, so that when it was presented, there weren't any errors, at least those that they've said they found when they looked at the census data at some point back and had to make a number of corrections. So at least then we know that if the information were put online or presented, that it would be based on the due diligence that our planning folks provided and looking at the information, make sure everything was correct. And in terms, I think, Carrie asking the question prompted me to think perhaps we should inquire whether this gentleman would like to fly out, and we could cover his airfare if at some point after the 18th we feel that we need to do more work to find someone. Or we could do that now if you all wanted to do that. But so it's really a call for all of you in terms of what you'd like to do with this Tony Fairfax. But we always have that option to fly him out.
So I want to speak to the point of the communication that would be between TJ and someone from the city. I'm not sure that I know that I'm not particularly comfortable with there being just a communication between TJ and the city of Everett. And I am saying that because this should be a very open process, and if this commission were to choose to have only one person speak with him, or two people in this particular case speak with him, that they would at least, he could ask the city whatever he wanted to, but to include that those someone from this commission, so that they could at least relay it back to us, so that we would have a clear understanding of where his questions or comments are coming from. Because just because none of us work in GIS, that doesn't mean that doesn't preclude us from having some say-so about how the maps are drawn.
I think that's a valid idea. Just whoever we pick, having them include like me and Chris, or I guess theoretically it could be all of us on most communication, just so that we see what's going on. My only worry is it could become a ton of emails, but I mean, that's manageable.
Tony's a guy that will have to work with the people. He's the one that does the data, and we will have to interact with the people and talking to them and making sure they know about it, right?
I also wanted to point out that, again, this is a sense that I get, and it is not necessarily, it may not, I am pointing out that I could be misreading this, but it seems that Tony actually, the process that he had in Whatcom County and the process that we're doing are totally different. TJ, the process, yeah, correct. Thank you for correcting me. TJ, the process that TJ had in Whatcom County and the process that we're having is totally different, because he seemed to be the one that was running things as opposed to this commission being the one that is running things.
I think assumptions are being made here. Because I don't think you know TJ, we don't know that. And I think I would much rather see that we take a look at all three of these folks, look at what they have to say when the third person comes in, and then evaluate all three of them. Because even to bring the Tony guy out here now, and we bring in the other guy, are we wasting money? Let's get all three of them here and take a look at them and see what they have to say. We can't judge TJ on something that we don't know. We have to be fair. And I think that's the only way to look at any of this, is to be fair and give everybody a chance. Because if you look at it, when you talk about the maps and you look at somebody else being somewhere and all this kind of stuff, who's to say that the person doing the map that you already have, that the same didn't happen? But what I'm saying is that let's get all three people in here, take a look at them, and see what they have to say, and then make a decision.
So I'm going to redirect this a little bit. So just in terms of discussing Tony, what are things that we like about what Tony has submitted? What are things that maybe we have further questions about? What are things that maybe we have issues on? Just so that we can discuss him a little bit before we move on.
To me, that's part of the challenge right now, because there are things I specifically liked about Tony that kind of made me uneasy about TJ, and I don't want to be down and set in my mind until I've had an opportunity to see the package from the third person. I think it's unfair to do it that way. We need to look at all three of the pieces of data and then have a discussion. Because I could sit here and I could say, well, you know, he really said really good things about cracking and fracking. And oh, no, but the other guy kind of left me really cold. And now I'm all set on what I want to do. And then this other guy shows up on the 18th and he didn't even know what fracking and cracking is. I thought that was oil terms or something.
So I heard Jim earlier mention maybe flying out Tony to see if he's available to come on the 18th. Is that something that you want to do? We didn't talk about that, so that might be an appropriate conversation to move forward with. If I can't get him, I mean, I don't know what this room's capability is. I can't imagine we can't do something, but I don't know.
Well, Ben made the point he'd like to see somebody face to face and be able to assess them, and I don't recall the point that Carrie made, but I think that's up to the group, whatever Mary and all of you feel, you know. I support whatever decision you all want to make on that line.
I think it's a pretty important aspect of the interview to be able to speak with someone. And so if there's a way to, at a minimum, do a video conference, I think I mean, it really puts him at a disadvantage for us to just see what he's written. And I think he put together a really great presentation, but I would be in favor of trying to do something to get him in front of us, if that's possible.
And I wouldn't be opposed if we could figure out if we are able to do some sort of a Zoom situation where we can see, and like if it was like on here and he could see what we're doing like in real time. But if that's something that he isn't open to or something,
We can.
oh, okay.
So we do have the opportunity to do a video conference in here. So I can invite him to do that.
I think that seems like a good, yep.
I would agree with that. It would be nice to see at least face to face, and then we can have the third present with questions and be here, and then we discuss, because it does feel like we're missing this big chunk. That the discussion is moot. We're not really getting anywhere because we don't have anything to compare it to. So it would be great to do a video conference. Yeah. We need the third.
So then, if it's okay with you guys, then do we want to just extend the meeting on the 18th? And what does that time frame look like for everyone? And then I will see Tony's availability and hopefully schedule a 20-minute block, and then I'll let Bob know that he'll be either before or after Tony, just so people can coordinate their schedules. But I'm curious how much time you think we're going to need on the 18th.
Before you ask that one, could I just ask one more thing? Would it be possible, what's really great about having Tony's is it's all right there in black and white. Now that he's answered the questions verbally, could we ask him to give us a written response with the same questions?
You mean TJ?
TJ,
I can ask him. I mean, there's no harm in asking.
it just helps me. I'm a terrible note taker. And, wow, really great answers there from Tony, and all I have is my memory. And you have your notes.
Writing in code.
It just would help.
Yeah,
without
I
formal
don't.
evaluation.
I will ask him, and I can also try to jam through and get the notes out quickly, and just try to. If he's not able to do that, then I will try to type out what he said. I'll try to. What is that called? Scribe. I don't know.
Transcribe.
We just need to be careful of the things that went on in the White House, and we don't want to have that in here.
So in answer to your question, I'd say about the same amount of time as TJ had.
I mean, the meeting in itself. Do we want to do 6 to 7:30 on the 18th? Do we need to do 6 to 8 on the 18th? Do we need to do 5:45 to 8? Like, what does this time frame look like in order for us to discuss all three candidates, have a discussion, and make a final decision?
I would be thinking that we would need less time for Tony because we have his written responses already, and that we could delve right into any additional questions that we would have, and then he could ask us any questions. I don't see any need for him to go and ask him these questions and then he read off the paper exactly what he just wrote.
$5:45 to 8.
I think the bulk of the time would be us discussing.
Yeah, we can do 5:45 to 8 if that works now.
I see people thinking, checking phones, checking calendars. So,
Or 6 to 8:15, or 6 until question mark, question mark,
I
question mark.
prefer a 6 o'clock start time. I don't care when it ends.
Let's accommodate Mary if she prefers 6. Let's
6 to
meet at 6 and
8:15.
go to 8:15.
We just got to get done.
Yeah,
Sure, that's fine.
so 6 to 8:15 on the 18th. Or whenever we get done.
right.
If we get done earlier, we can go earlier. If we get done later, then we'll sleep here.
We'll order. John's gonna order everyone pizza. I think if we're here past 8:15. So, is there any other discussion on the interview?
I just have one point I'd like to make. You know, on this matter of appearance, if folks would have watched some of the earlier discussions we had, they might think that all of us have a different bias or something on different issues. And as we talk about the Planning and Public Works Department, I'm really confident that the Planning and Public Works Department could and would work independently with whoever the committee selects as the district master to make sure that all of the information is accurate and the data is accurate so that the district master can do their work. So I'm real confident in the Planning and Public Works Department to provide good work, independent work.
Thank you.
I think we can close the discussion. Do we need to vote? Or I guess, do we need to do a motion to close it? No?
Nope, we already have the next meeting on the calendar, so you can move past item 1 onto discussion items,
yeah.
and then it's a wrap.
Awesome. Does anyone have any discussion items they want to bring up for this meeting? I do not have any. None? Oh my goodness. Are we ready to adjourn this meeting? Okay, I move to adjourn this meeting.
Second.
Awesome. We're done. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.